Okay, can I be heard? No, that's great. Well, I was told by Les and Jessica in the car that this was very much a family gathering, and I can hear that in your voices. They're very joyful. Is there something? Can you hear me? What? I'm sorry, I don't. Is this? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Is it okay? Is my voice all right? All right. Yeah. So I'd like to talk about transpersonal psychology and particularly about the research methods that I have been working with over time. And one method in particular called intuitive inquiry, which I've had the pleasure of creating with my graduate students at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. And instead of having you look at a title, though, I want to tell you that this is the view from my home. Isn't that lovely? And I don't even have to be a good photographer to take really beautiful photos. This is in the winter. This is about as much snow as we get in southern Oregon. And 2 or 3 inches, maybe 4 or 5. And because I teach in the ITP's, the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology's global online program, I get to live wherever I choose. So this is where I choose to live. So I think I'd like to begin by talking a little bit about the history of the development of transpersonal research methods, specifically as I understand it, so that you have a certain context for now, my talking about intuitive inquiry, which is the method that I have created. When William Broad and I came to the Institute of Transpersonal in 1992, we came together the same, well, we didn't come together, we met there, that sounds, and we both have separate partners, it sounds like we're married, but no, we're not. But in some ways we are, in a certain kind of way, because we've worked together for so many years, 17 years now, taught so many classes together, collaborated on so many projects, that we can finish each other's sentences. Like an old married couple. It's really kind of funny. So he's a wonderful colleague. And when we met in 1992 at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, we very much formed a bond, and we had a lot of backgrounds in common that allowed us to work together. First of all, we were both trained as experimental psychologists in roughly the same era, and both in the Midwest. In America, the Midwest, as I'm sure you're aware of where the Midwest is, he was at the University of Iowa, and I was at the University of Nebraska, which are right next door to each other, by states. But we never met. But they're both, like most of the land-grant schools in the Midwest, they are very behaviorally oriented, behavioral psychology. Gordon Allport, the American psychologist, called it Dust Bowl behaviorism. They're a rather famous expression, actually. And so we were very traditionally trained in Hull and Spence and Skinner, and all that stuff. And we value it tremendously. We do. But we have moved and changed in our work. William, of course, is probably well known here for his work in parapsychology, because you do a lot of that work here, research here. And we were very well prepared to respond to the needs of our students in transpersonal psychology. Both of us obviously came to the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology with our own spiritual perspectives. I had been trained as an Episcopal priest, and more recently I've been working with a Tibetan Rinpoche Lama. So, you sort of cover a lot of ground in the field. So, when we started teaching research methods, and that was our task, what we were hired to do at ITP, it became very apparent to us that while we could adapt many of the more traditional methods, quantitative and qualitative, to the study of transpersonal topics, there was also a lack of methods that really studied transpersonal phenomena on its own grounds. In other words, used mindfulness, compassion, appreciation of differences, the kinds of values that we have in the field of transpersonal psychology as legitimate ways to collect data. My own interest was and is in intuition. And how does one bring intuition directly into the research process? And so that's my particular emphasis. And I could talk about intuition if you want. Actually, if you want, I can go that direction. But intuition is an area that I've been researching and looking at a lot of time. My own particular, if you will, specialty in intuition, because of my own background, is in body-based forms of intuition. All right, sort of the things you know out of this stuff. All right, the felt sense and the movement and what we learn from gesture and things like that. Those are the kinds of. But there are many, many forms of intuition, and having worked with dozens and dozens of students who are intuitive and inclined, I mean, I'm beginning to think there's a kind of intuition for every person, and that it's highly variable. Okay. But I could talk about that more if you have some questions. So we began in 1992 to create these methods. Our book came that Les mentioned, Transpersonal Research Methods for the Social Science, came out in 1998, and we're writing another book now. So that's kind of fun. All right, so intuitive inquiry, transforming self and others through research practice. So in a very fundamental way, William and I have understood the nature of research on transpersonal psychology and the methods we have created as a means to transform, to change, to really, truly morph, change, grow the researcher, and implicitly over time the participants and the readers of research articles and the culture at large. So the trajectory of transpersonal methods, as we understand it over the years, has been to do very much what Abraham Maslow said many years ago: the farther reaches of human nature, to develop those potentials through research. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Yeah, okay. So research is not something divorced, that you do in the laboratory the way I was trained. It is intimately related to your spiritual practice, your personal growth. You do the research in order to further that. You study something you care about deeply, not something you just learned about in the library, which is the way I was trained, that you might really have an affinity for, but, sometimes it's almost accidental. But rather, you study things that you care about, and through that process, further understanding and your own personal development and that of others. So that's kind of in a nutshell, but that's basically very at the heart of everything we have done. So intuitive inquiry is what I would describe as an epistemology of the heart. It's all those things of heartful knowing, ways of knowing that are endemic to heartfulness, not heart as in a part of your body so much, but heartfulness as in compassion. My own belief that your attitude of compassion and kindness in the way one designs a study, picks a topic, designs a study, collects data, analyzes data, and interprets data, that's the sequence we all know well, that your attitude of compassion and kindness permeates that process. And so how you orient yourself to the topic really matters. And if you've been trained, in another way, you know that you often feel very distant from the topic. I was trained in that way. You can feel somewhat distant from it, and my own feeling is that that influences the way you understand the phenomena itself. But kindness really matters, or compassion really matters at the very heart. So, compassionate ways of knowing. And for all of us who've ever been in love, anybody ever been in love in the room? That when you love someone or something or a topic, in a sense, you get to know that topic or person very well. So, if you love someone, you know what their face looks in intimate detail, or their hands. That's a different kind of knowing. Okay? I'm flashing on my father, when he died, and I stared at his face knowing it was the last time I would see it, So I could just memorize it. It's a different kind of knowing. Okay? So that's the kind of knowing that I think is appropriate to research, especially in I would say all research, by the way, but particularly in transpersonal. So another characteristic is up there on the top. It's the imagination. Imagination is very involved in intuitive inquiry and all the methods and procedures we've created at ITP. And transformation of the researcher, him or herself. Research is understood as a personal growth process, which then furthers one's own personal growth, but also is then intended through a kind of intention to help others in that journey as well. So it obviously has a highly transpersonal and holistic perspective, which I'm sure you can see in all the vocabulary I'm using. Very briefly, the origin, overview of intuitive inquiry. The hermeneutical structure, it's what I call the 5 cycles is a hermeneutical. It's a soft structure or sacred container to the intuitive process. And I'm going to talk about that in some depth. But originally, the philosophic term, if you want to sort of know where this fits epistemologically, it's in hermeneutics. Origins in Gadamer, Merleau-Ponty. Heuristic research, as in Clark Moustakis. Are some of you familiar with that? Yeah, okay. Feminist research. And Eugene Gendlin's thinking beyond patterns. That's how Gendlin's focusing work has developed in the last 5-6 years or something like that. I first learned hermeneutics in seminary. So for any of you who don't have a classical education in hermeneutics, you got to go to seminary. It's kind of like that. It's hardly anywhere else is it taught anymore. It's a real shame. So I learned, clergy, they, if they're trained well, whatever, they learn to read Scripture and then use hermeneutics to interpret. Another word for hermeneutics could be interpretation. You learn interpretation. So if you're reading, say, the Gospel of Mark or whatever it might be, or the Song of Solomon, as we were talking about in the car, as you might guess, which is some actual speculation that it might have been the only text written by a woman. Have you ever heard that? Yeah, in the Hebrew canon. So anyway, that hermeneutics has to do with interpretation. It comes from Hermes, the god of communication in Greek pantheon. So it has to do with how you interpret. So if you're reading the Gospel of Mark, you have a passage, you need to preach on it on Sunday, you read it, at least a week before if you're lucky and not the night before, and you intensely studied that particular passage and all that went into what scholars know about the time period that it was spoken, whether it was edited, what it was actually said by Jesus, what do they think about this and that, and all that sort of stuff. And when you have all that knowledge, then what you do is you interpret it for your congregation as best you can. All right. And so that's the classical understanding in a nutshell of what hermeneutics is as a discipline, as a field. It's a huge field. There are Buddhist hermeneutics. There's Buddhist, Jewish midrash, not Buddhist midrash. There's hermeneutics in every religious tradition of which I am aware. That is written down. I mean, anything that has text associated with it. Here we go. Okay. Well, I think that's about. I mean, I can come back to some of that. In my mind, some people don't go this far, but in my mind, the point of intuitive inquiry is to break set with established theory. I often suggest people don't use intuitive inquiry, by the way, that there are other methods. I'm not in any way competitive. I really believe in the pluralism of research methods. Truly believe. I think it's great that the method you choose should match your topic. You should choose a method that really works for your topic and your person, for that matter. But in my mind, intuitive inquiry often works very well to break set with established theory and scholarship. That you are inviting deliberately, with intention and passion. Passion is one of the other feminine qualities of intuitive inquiry. That you are inviting intuition into the process, which inevitably has this kind of irascible quality, intuition, It just tends to break set a little bit. And I kind of like that, frankly. So there we have it. And implicit trajectories in the data projecting into the future. That was what I was speaking about before, that implicit in all the transpersonal methods really is to develop the further natures of human nature. What are we moving toward? How can we solve the problems that are a part of our global community in 2008? Okay. So there are 5 cycles, and I'm now going to review those 5 cycles so you know a little bit about the structure of the method. So it's an inductive method. Therefore, cycle 1 is at the bottom, if you will, and you build knowledge, theoretical knowledge. And so in that sense, for those of you who know about qualitative methods, it's akin or aligned to grounded theory in this way, that you're building towards a knowledge base, grounded in the data. Grounded theory is grounded in the data. Intuitive inquiry has that same kind of quality. You're building knowledge. So the first task in intuitive inquiry is cycle 1. And in cycle 1, what you're doing is clarifying the topic. In other words, what is the topic? Very simply stated. How many people have ever had problems clarifying what your topic really is? Everybody should be raising your hand. I mean, there's nobody who doesn't have that problem at some point. What? All the time. Well, good for you. I mean, you must be a very good student because that's precisely the case. That to understand, you kind of circle around your topic until you finally kind of get there, and that's good. So what I have done, because my students have had so much trouble with this, I've created some practical ways to deal with this. So I'll just give you kind of the way it goes. So somebody will come into my office and say, Rosemarie, I know I'm supposed to have a dissertation topic, but I have no idea what I'm going to do. All right, that's kind of happens all the time. And I say, okay, this sounds familiar, huh? And or a thesis topic or whatever it is, And so I say, okay, what are you dreaming about? That's my response. Yeah. Or what's really puzzling you right now? Or what are the images that keep on coming up in your imagination that you can't get rid of? Or what are you journaling about? Talk to me about that. Are you keeping a journal? Well, if you're not, I suggest that you do. And your journal could be drawings, paintings, a lot of things. Some people come into my office and they know right off the top what they want to study, and they actually do that. Some people come in and know exactly what they want, and they change their mind radically, several times. But the point of if they use intuitive inquiry is a process and I'm going to go through that. But I'd like to overview the 5 cycles quickly first. Yeah.
Do you always have to have a research question?
Well, you have to have a topic, like something. You could start very big, but I think if you want to I try to encourage my students to finish. I am not being facetious. I'm really not being flip. It's that when you pay the kind of money my students pay for tuition, I have an ethical responsibility to get them focused. So I think if they had endless amounts of time and and energy, I might have a different attitude about that.
So you're saying yes?
Yeah. And it could be, I want to study the experience. That's often the way qualitative studies are. I want to study, this is how if I were in a teaching mode, I'd say, frame your research topic like this. I want to study the experience of fill in the blank. So it could be, I want to study the experience of sacred weeping, profound sacred weeping. That's one of the things I did some years back. Yes? Right.
And I'm thinking, that isn't it like this is just just came to me. I don't know if it makes any sense, but I don't know enough about psychology. But isn't it our problems that repeat?
Yeah, I can talk about that. I mean, if you have for instance, I'll make a segue, and then I'll come back to that later. Very often, the kinds of things that people study are the kinds of challenges that they have in their life. We were talking about this in the car, actually. Sometimes, the very things my students study best are somehow related to their own traumas in life. Because there is a way, and I think this is more true of transpersonal psychology than other fields, maybe humanistic is like this, that we gather a certain knowledge base around our traumas. Almost light appears around our traumas in a way, like wounded healers. And that would be a nice discussion at when we go back and forth with questions, because I think that I've seen that so often. Not always at all. I'd say maybe, just off the top, I'd say maybe a quarter of the dissertations have that kind of quality. All right. Cycle 2. Cycle 2 would be after you clarify the topic. Cycle 2 has to do with what I call developing your initial or preliminary lenses for understanding the topic. You literally develop a set of statements about your topic. Sacred weeping is about intense feelings. And you develop a whole series of initial lenses so that when you get to cycle 4, which is after data collection, you will see the difference between where you started and where you ended up. So there's a tracking, which is very important if you're going to do qualitative research, because if you don't articulate in a very clear way, and this is often the most difficult things for students, especially new researchers especially, to articulate where you are before you collect data, you can never go back to that point. Because after you've collected data, your whole mindset is different. So you have to articulate it before you begin, and so it can be a little messy and vague, your initial lenses, but it's important to articulate where you begin a process. What is your pre-understanding of the topic before you collect data? All right. For those of you who know phenomenology, it's akin to bracketing, but it's not. I don't assume that you are removing your own biases. Okay, I'm actually asked researchers, and this is a hermeneutical bias, that you actually move through your biases and transform them as you move forward. That's hermeneutical. That you are changing. You are changing. The research topic is changing. Your understanding of the topic is changing, and hopefully you'll eventually be done. Some people accuse me of, they come back several years later after doing an intuitive inquiry, and they say, Rosemarie, I'm on cycle 44. It's really true because they keep on changing their understanding. And that's just human, that's fine. Okay. So you do a traditional literature review at this point. The way I was trained, you do the literature review first. That's not what I suggest, all right? Then you collect data, and you create data summaries, and I will describe what data summaries are in a little bit. Cycle 4 has to do with interpreting the data collected, and that goes in the discussion section because it's interpretive. And then the final interpretation is going back to the literature review, what you put into the lit review, as in traditional in all discussion sections of all conventional articles, is you go back to the lit review, say how your findings reinterpret or add or subtract, change, morph the understanding in the literature. It's that part. Cycle 5 is very traditional in that sense, okay? All right. Here's just another graph of the same thing. So intuitive inquiry is a little bit like a labyrinth. It is not a maze, as I heard a discussion here before. You are not going endlessly around and nowhere, but you are actually in a pattern that evolves out of your unconscious processes, to use, or intuitive processes. Unconscious would be a more Jungian word, or subliminal would be a perceptual word. But you're really working with your intuitive nature in each one of the 5 cycles. Another image, this was taken by one of my students in Macau. This is bamboo scaffolding. That's a casino. It's about 80 or 90 stories up. Okay. Why bamboo scaffolding? I lived in Asia in the late 70s, in Japan and South Korea, and I saw this bamboo scaffolding, not 80 floors up in that era, but bamboo scaffolding, it looks like matchsticks to me, or toothpicks, but Chinese men just sort of, I think, how is that possible? You're laughing, but, and very limber, obviously. And here's another photo.
Just let you know that building has been completed now.
Oh, okay. In other words, the metaphor of bamboo scaffolding, like labyrinth, is that it provides you with a soft, easy structure, like the cycles. It gives you something to hang on to. If you worked with the students I work with, you realize why I need to give them some structure, because they would never finish. And the thing about the intuitive process, if you work with people who are highly intuitive, is their minds are serial, not linear. In other words, they go ding, da ding, da ding, da ding, da ding, da ding. They're all over the place. So in order to keep people moving forward, I had to create some kind of structure, and that's the 5 cycles that I briefly have gone over so far. Okay? Here's some of the men. Way up high. This photograph is way up high. So it gives you something to hang on. The structure, the 5 cycles, give you something to hang on to when you're lost or confused. And by the way, being lost or confused is a positive attribute in intuitive inquiry. It's actually usually just the moment before you have a breakthrough. So if somebody comes into my office and says, I'm totally confused, I feel, I can't do anything else, I said, good. Because usually, and I've given up. I've given up. That's usually a good sign. All right. I've learned that over time. And that's the way it works for me. All right. I'd like to go through a couple of examples of cycle 1. I'll go into a little bit more depth on cycle 1 so you can get, in the short period of time we have together. How are we doing on time? Okay. A taste for intuitive inquiry. So in cycle 1, I have developed a meditation, basically, or an experiential exercise, to make it sound a little bit more academic, in which I ask the students or my dissertation supervisees, to do a meditation, to go into meditation in the way almost in your own style, okay? And then to remember a time when you experienced the topic you want to study, either your own experience or through a friend or something like that. So go to that moment, relive that moment, and out of that state of reliving it with all your sensorial aspects, the sensorium of your body, to pick an image or a text or a poem or a whatever that represents that experience to you in some way. I'm asking you to go basically into your unconscious processes. Pull out of that an image that reminds you of that. Now, the first example up here, Susan Carlock, 2003, Study of True Joy Among Christian Mystics. She did this meditation on, going to her experience of true joy, and what did she come up with? Michelangelo's Pietà. Now, is that joyful? No.
Not at first sight.
I mean, it's a beautiful...
It's beautiful, but
it's beautiful. It's got to be one of the most beautiful sculptures, I mean, it's sensuous. It's so beautiful. And Susan, who must be one of the few extroverts ever at ITP, we're also introverted, but she was in a class, I remember, the occasion very much, we did the meditation, and she got, collectively, maybe there were 12 people or something, and we did the meditation, and she got, the image that came to her was Michelangelo's Pietà. And of course, she didn't get it, so of course she said, it didn't make sense to her initially. And so she said, Rosemarie, what does it mean? And, I said, Susan, it's your topic. I don't know what it means, And so you do the research and find out what it means. And what happened was very interesting. This was a very illuminative image for her, because what happened as she collected her data, which is cycle 3, she found out that Christian mystics, the ones that were the most joyful and known by others as being extraordinarily joyful, Brother Lawrence is the one I remember, for example, when they described true joy, it was always pivoted around their understanding of suffering. That true joy had meaning relative to suffering. Now, doesn't it make sense? Yeah. But, so you can see, that particular image was unusually powerful as time went on. Now, what I've then asked students to do, and I'll describe some of the other things, you find this poem or image or I call it text and very broadly defined. Could be a dream image. It could be a lot of things. I think I have a slide here somewhere that actually gives you some of the, in cycle 1 there. You can just read that. It could be a lot of things, including, a bar graph. I mean, if that's meaningful vis-a-vis your topic, that's fine. Nobody has done that yet. I'm waiting, but there's no reason you can't include quantitative data in intuitive inquiry. Nobody has done it, but there's.
mathematical equations.
Yeah, it could be mathematical equations.
Has anyone done
No.
I could suggest one.
Good.
Later.
All right. Because there's no reason. I did factor analysis for years as and it's a highly intuitive process if you do it well. I don't know that I did it well, but I certainly did it. And okay. So what you do then is, once you have chosen a text, broadly defined, it could be a poem, it could be a sculpture, as the example I gave you already, you then, for the next couple of weeks, engage in an imaginal dialogue with that text, broadly defined. That text is not external to you because, of course, it came out of your unconscious, right? It's not a thing out there. So in that dialogue, which you document with, journal entries or some other way in your laptop or whatever it is. In that dialogue, which I suggest 10, 15 minutes a day or half hour every other day or something, you start unpacking why that text came out of your unconscious processes. And you start to articulate. And in that process, your topic clarifies. You get more and more clear about what, say, true joy is, at least at the initial part of your study, so that you at least have a statement of topic that's clear and precise. And it works. It works really quite well. It sounds, like, how could that work? But it actually works quite well. Let me go back to the slide before. I've been doing this a long time now at this point. Later. Catherine Unthung, Kitty, she was looking at trauma survival, and she picked a Rembrandt sketch, and it's a sketch of Jesus holding out his hand while Peter is drowning because he falls in the water because he loses faith. Remember that part of Scripture? Okay. Well, she didn't know why she had chosen that text, but the sketch as her text. But it became clear as she collected her data and analyzed it that one of the things about trauma that became so important was the ambivalence between holding on to your trauma, because there's a kind of, if I get this trauma, I might get hurt again, or letting go and relaxing. So this sketch actually became a pivotal part of her understanding. It's a brilliant dissertation. I really recommend everybody read it. The second, I put it up, this was one of the most unusual dissertations I've ever supervised. This Diane Ricard's, this was a study of the feminine cultural shadow by studying World War II female espionage agents. Now, isn't that original? That is a really interesting study. And she really wanted to look at the dark side of transpersonal. And so she picked espionage. I mean, who would think, that's not a transpersonal topic. But yeah, I can tell you about that study, if we have time, or at lunch or whatever. It's just that she really wanted to look at what allowed these women to be so extraordinary in their time, to do something that was, quote, dark. And who were they, and how they got there, and that kind of thing. It's a brilliant study, and you probably know that World War II records have been declassified now, 50 years after the war. So she did a fair bit of her research in the British Museum, where a lot of those archives are held. She's Canadian, and my students are in the English-speaking world, all over the world, actually. And so she would travel around, and she found. I've forgotten how, I think it was 11, finally. Through various networking procedures, through journalists and museum records and newspaper articles and so on, she was able to find, through trusted friends, gatekeepers, because a lot of these women had never spoken about any of these activities, even to their family, husbands, was able to find about 11 women now in their 80s and 90s and go and interview them. It's a fascinating study. The book that was her Cycle 1 text to help her clarify the topics by Brit, Marcus Binney's, on British female agents. And this is a quote from that book. Agents were flown into France during moon periods, 1 week on either side of the full moon, when there was sufficient light for night flying. All right, so do you get an idea of Cycle 1, how you choose a text, you interact with the text through imaginal dialogue, which could be dance, it could be a lot of things. It's not just a lot of words. It could be dream images, it could be a lot of things. And in that process, you begin to understand the depth of your topic and clarify it and refine it so that you have a kind of full repertoire. It's not a cold topic to you anymore. It's very precise. Well, that's the types of data. And then cycle 2, which I mentioned before, you articulate your preliminary lenses, those things in which you go into the research process knowing before you collect data. So in hermeneutical terms, this would be the forward arc. It's kind of, you might call it an in-breath. Oops. What happened? Oh, no, that's right. These are just some other examples. Cycle 2, you also engage in more imaginal dialogue. Catherine Manos uses Hildegard of Bingen and George O'Keeffe to study female nature artists, and so on and so forth. Okay, so cycle 1 and 2 is the forward arc of the hermeneutical circle. It's when you understand where you begin. It's kind of like an in-breath. And then it's much more introverted in style and reflective and working with your imagination and all that kind of stuff. Cycle 3 is more extroverted. You're collecting data, you're analyzing, you're interpreting it, and you're writing your discussion section and communicating to an audience. I always tell my students, I'm not your audience. I'm just your chairperson or on your committee. Your real audience is somewhere else. Who are you really talking to? Whose life do you want to touch in some way? So that's the return cycle. So cycles, and there's an error here. It should be cycles 3, 4, and 5 is the return cycle, when you then use the data to return to the beginning and revise your initial lenses, your pre-understanding, as it's called in hermeneutical language. So in cycle 3, you start collecting data. And, I could describe some of these studies, like Diane Ricards then went and found World War II female espionage agents. That was very difficult because they didn't advertise anywhere. I mean, it's actually quite dangerous. They often didn't even tell their family, as I mentioned before, or their husband. Very often they never spoke about it to anyone, because after the war, it was a classified information. You didn't speak about it. So she had to really find these people, and and they were getting older, and so on and so forth. It was very challenging. So she did a great deal of traveling and interviewed them. She interviewed them in a very interesting way. Just to give you some depth in one study, is she went to their homes, typically. I don't know if I'd get it past my IRB these days. I don't know. Do you have IRBs here? Ethics review boards?
No, yes.
Internal review boards, okay. But at that point, nobody bothered me. I got it through, because Diane went to these women's homes. I think one interview was conducted by phone, but I'm not even sure. I think actually all of them were. And she asked them actually if they had any photos or memorabilia to bring it out. So the data collection was actually quite rich in this particular study. There's something I wanted to say. I'm looking for it. Susan Carlock, the True Joy study of Christian mystics, she did not interview. Typically, interviewing contemporaneous people is a kind of a class. It happens a lot, at least at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. I'm always trying to get people to do something else but interview, like study song lyrics over for transpersonal themes or anything. I get tired of interviewing, but interviewing, it's a perfectly fine strategy. Susan Carlock, instead of interviewing, she really felt that she needed to go into the mystical literature. And so her data collection was to collect to really do a very thorough search of the Christian mystical literature and find other people who were known in their communities as unusually joyful. That was her criteria. So you develop criteria to help you either find the text or to find the people. Okay, so these are fairly traditional research strategies in this sense. This is not unusual. A lot of feminist networking goes into a number of these studies, in other words, or kind of referral, like a telephone chain. Do you know anybody who fits this description? And then you go find them and ask them if they will be interviewed. I mean, that happens a fair bit. There was a study I saw up there by Kathy Manos, who lives in Germany. And so she was looking for female nature artists. She found female nature artists, a felt worker at Findhorn, by the way, just all kinds of people who knew each other, but there was no other way to find them. Weavers, just very interesting ways. So the traditional, random sampling doesn't apply here. It just doesn't apply, all right? And that's, of course, appropriate to more quantitative studies, of course, all right? So in cycle 3, then, you develop criteria for data collection, whether it be texts of historical archival nature or whether it be people, interviewees, or whatever it is. And you develop criteria for the selection of data from among your sources, collect the data, and then you prepare summary reports, and it's descriptive, and this is an important word, a manner as possible. Now, why descriptive? The reason for this, and as far, in terms of how I've developed intuitive inquiry as a method, intuition can apply to all methods, of course, but as a method, what I want people to do in cycle 3 is to help the reader understand the data as raw as possible, so that you, the reader, can read an intuitive inquiry and see the data as close as possible to the way the researcher sees it. Now, of course, there's interpretation in even what you report, needless to say. But with that caveat, you try to describe the data. And there are this data, I'll go through the data, different ways people have done this. But the metaphor I use when I try to describe how to do this for my students is sort of like being in a helicopter. You're not way up high in a plane. You're kind of low hovering over the data. You kind of describe it descriptively. You're kind of flying over it like a helicopter. All right. Then, here's some descriptive modes for data presentation in cycle 3. And he has taken a lot of different styles, modes. Writer portraits of participants. Those of you who know Clark Moustakis, this is what Clark Moustakis does. It has worked in intuitive inquiry. What you do if you have interviewees is you write a literary portrait of that person and their experience vis-a-vis the topic. All right. And it's very descriptive, but it is a summary. It is a summary. It's not, you try to summarize rather than interpret. Okay. And that can be challenging, but that's what you try to do. Sometimes in intuitive inquiries, we've done, inquiries here. You do participant story. You just tell the story of their, I shouldn't say just because there's no just. You tell the story. Some data should not be reduced beyond, should stay story form, let's just say. Now, I could talk about that at some point, because that's a real very difficult thing to figure out sometimes. Sometimes it is the story that carries the data. It's the genre that carries the data. Some people have narrative accounts. It could be film. It could be a lot. You could present it. We have dissertations with DVDs. And University Microfilm doesn't like it. The American, thing, it has to be black and white text. But we can put those DVDs at least in the dissertation in the library, and people could actually get it from the library. And that is color mandala pictures are very common in these dissertations, are renderings from the artists or interviewees or something like that, or photos of pictures, I should say more accurately. Some people have done content analyses, and I have on my website, which was on that earlier slide, I've created a way of doing thematic content analysis, and you can take a look at that. That does not require a computer program. You just have to paste and copy from Word. Because I find that those computer programs, I don't know how you've experienced them. How many have used like NVivo or any of those? Anybody? Yeah? Yeah, okay, a few people. I find they distance me from the data. I have problems with it, but maybe it's just me. A lot of people, I'm not going to go through the whole list, but embodied writing excerpts. Embodied writing is a style of writing that my students and I created about in the middle 90s. And many people have used it. It's a way of writing and collecting data from the perspective of the body. So it invokes the senses and the sensorium of the body, as opposed to the way I was trained, which is to observe from the outside. Does this distinction make sense? And so it's a hard thing. It takes a lot of practice actually to write in an embodied way. It's very poetic by and large. So there are you could do more mathematical. One person has done that, has done statistical analysis in cycle 3. Let's just some more examples. I pretty much have gone through most of these, except maybe Aurora Hill. Aurora Hill did an intuitive inquiry of a Native American storytelling. Oh, okay. And Sharon Huffman did, her data collection was a mixed media gallery exhibit in San Francisco. And as people left, she handed them a questionnaire. And it was on the street, literally. And people came in, other people were invited. And and she had positions at the in the exhibit in which people could try on the hat of the woman who was living with breast cancer and things like that, and write about it. In cycle 4, you refine your lenses. You take all the data that you've collected, and then the lenses that you came in and articulated in cycle 2 are refined, expanded, subtracted, everything you can imagine to them, changed, altered, deleted, whatever. And I'm not going to go through it just for the sake of time. Cycle 5, and you can email me for my most recent chapter if you want. Cycle 5 then is a very traditional integration of the findings vis-a-vis the literature which are reviewed at the start. So the unique features of intuitive inquiry: transformation of self and culture, projecting into the fusion. It's very important to write in your own personal voice. I was trained to write in the third-person past tense. Do you remember that, anybody? Yeah. There was even a time when I had to refer to myself as he. It's true. I mean, it's amazing, but it actually happened. I won't go into it. And the theory-building potential of intuitive inquiry, that a number of people now have used intuitive inquiry to refine theory. And it's quite, this is kind of one of the growing edges of intuitive inquiry, how to do that. And auspicious bewilderment, as I mentioned before, being confused is usually a good thing, and I recommend it highly. Thank you very much. And so my talk is dedicated to my recently deceased 17-year-old cat. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there will be many questions and discussion, and you probably don't need me to point to people. So
Oh, no, I can.
take it as it comes.
Yeah. What's your name?
My name is Clive Wood.
Hi.
Lovely presentation.
Thank you. You're welcome.
May I ask you a very simple question and a very...
What?
May I ask you a very simple question?
Sure.
And then a very difficult one. The very simple question...
Uh-oh, I know how this is the hard one.
No, there is no secret.
It's okay.
I sent people out to do interviews. I'm interested to know when the lady finds the names of the World War II espionage agents, what does she say to them to get in? Because there are all sorts of things that you can say.
Right.
They're plagued by journalists that say, we're doing a piece on...
Right.
So that's the first, that's the easy question. The second one is actually John Rowan's question, turned around, and it has to do with cycle 44. How do you know when you're finished?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, those are good questions. So in terms of Diane Ricard's study, she literally did mostly call these women initially, and there were some women that put her off for a year. Well, I'll think about it. Well, I'm not feeling well. Who knows what that meant? But yeah, I know. I'm getting to it. The in was I have been referred by your friend who, and it was all about networking. So that was there. And one of the interesting parts about that is almost always they were men, the referrals. It was almost as that the men were playing a protective role vis-a-vis this woman, which makes a certain amount of sense. And typically, they knew that they were going to get called. In other words, the informant, if you had called them and said, this researcher, who seems like a really nice person, is going to call you. Okay, so not everybody said yes, by the way. Yeah, by no means. But most did. But I don't remember off the top how many didn't. But not everybody said yes. And sometimes the reasons were were health issues, as you can well imagine, in that population. Okay. And back to the question about cycle 44. Yeah, how do you know when to finish? That's why I created the structure, because people didn't. That's why the soft hermeneutical structure. People usually have a felt sense of when they're done with cycle 1, felt sense when they're done with cycle 2. And when people get lost, and feel like they're in there too long, or they don't know what they're doing, aside from thinking it's a good problem, if they, I'll say go back and read the instructions. And really, quite honestly, there are ways in which that I created intuitive inquiry so I wouldn't have to talk to these people every day. Because intuition, you can feel kind of like you need, and I created a method so that they would have a structure that wouldn't require me as their supervisee or therapist in some way. So that, and I really mean it, go back and read the instructions because it really is there. And most of the time that works, unless unless there are other things going on in their lives that are, which can happen, of course, too. Typically it works. Sometimes I have to tell them they're done. That also happens. And right now I'm in the process of training people to supervise intuitive inquiry. That's kind of my task now. And there are 2 questions. Right? I saw your hand first. All right. What's your name?
David.
Thank you.
Because of time, primarily, I guess, you kind of skipped over cycle 4.
Right.
To what extent is that really the question, how have you been changed by exposure to the state?
Yes, that's a very nice way of putting it. How have you been changed? But in terms of building knowledge, it's how has it changed your understanding of the topic? Which implicit is how it has changed you too. Yeah. Both are relevant.
Because in a way, you can see that stages 2 and 4 as like baseline finding
Sure.
data on
Sure.
an experiment that's been conducted on the research.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing magical in a way about the cycles. They're very much the way they fit the scientific paradigm. And what has been most difficult, I needed I tried to create something that would translate. Because one of the problems with transpersonal research, it can get kind of amorphous and go on forever, and so the structure is meant to be helpful. By no means do you have to use, you can use a lot of methods, but that's what I found the most helpful over the years, is to help people stay on track and not to get diverted by every possible thing that could happen. Yeah, Malcolm? Oh, I think your question, I promised you. Oh, I don't know. I actually don't know how long this session is.
7 minutes. So the questions are short and the answers are shorter.
Shorter.
So actually,
Okay, right, I got it.
My general thing, I did have a specific question, but I'm going to leave the specific question out. And just give a general feeling and then a response. So my general feeling is that halfway through I started panicking and thinking, oh, this is too extrovert, this is too active. I can't, it's not my business. Even though I'm doing an MA, I just kind of lost the plot halfway. It just felt like, oh, this is not for me.
Okay, that's fine.
And then the response was to something someone was saying about the protective role. And I was just going to bring in about a male protective role. I was just going to bring in some psychoanalytic, I don't know if it's easier, about the word being male and masculine. And actually, my current teacher, Nikki, she was telling me a lot of female students, the relationship with work is somehow, I don't know I don't know enough about psychoanalytic how, but it's somehow related to a woman's relationship to the masculine or her animus.
Well, you could look at it that way. I don't know. Yeah, I think we understand. Yeah, it's a work in the world which has a certain amount of activity associated with it, and there is an extroversion in parts of intuitive inquiry, but it's a lot less extroverted than a lot of other methods, I should tell you. All right, there's another. Malcolm?
I really loved your presentation.
Thank you.
It's a wonderful contribution to the life and times and reception. I really do. I'm so glad Les suggested inviting you.
Oh,
I really am.
oh, thank you.
Heartfelt.
Yeah, it was through Les. Yeah.
But what I was curious about is that I noticed that all the examples of researchers you gave, female.
There was one up there that I didn't talk about, Jay. Yeah.
Where Chris and I are, many of not exclusively, but I think it links. Your talk links quite nicely with Les's aspects. Les's talk about the feminine, or rising feminine in our time, or possibly, which is a theme I raised last year.
Mm-hmm.
Was that most of the core researchers where I am, they're very active in the women's section.
Mm-hmm.
Very good friends of mine, and very good friends and colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, is there a risk of this approach being seen as a more female kind of enterprise?
Well, that wouldn't bother me very much, but
there's a risk of does it have to be made more accessible to male?
oh yeah. Well, actually, it seems to be turning now. Most of the supervisees I have now in intuitive inquiry are men. So I don't know what that's about. Maybe it needs to have gotten a little bit more legit for the guys to try it. That's my suspicion. Yeah. One or two. Yes.
The question of intuition, you call it intuitive inquiry. I mean, my experience is bouncy. It just comes and goes,
Right.
and it's unreliable. But at a higher level of consciousness, people have more experience of
More skillful.
level, causal level, those
Right.
kind of things. It's more ordinary. It's more
Right.
accessible.
That's right.
Is that right?
Hmm. And also more skillful. They're typically, if you can become more skillful at discerning your intuitions. The difference between intuition and just a projection, what you want to see. That you've got to work on that, and that takes time and energy and practice and feedback. It takes years, to really get good at it. And most people are better at some kinds of intuition than they are at others. There's a lot of literature showing that science has progressed hugely by intuitive insights like Einstein. If you read any of those biographies, you'll see that Einstein, when he was stuck, went and played the piano, and he would have these insights, and very visual insights typically, but people... So play is an important part of intuition, relaxing, playing, taking time off, going to the beach, going for a walk. Don't you have I have most of my intuitions in the bathtub, frankly, I do. It's just true. So yes, a question and then maybe we stop? Or?
Yeah, so I'm interested in the multiple resonances I'm hearing in the word method. Yeah?
Okay.
In one sense, it's a method of inquiry,
Mm-hmm.
Inquiring into something out there.
Mm-hmm.
That's very obvious the way you describe it, that it's really a journey for the individual as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you use the phrase about looking at the wounds.
Mm-hmm. It can be that way, right?
It can be.
Yeah.
And so the question I would ask is, if a person is entering therapy, or some kind of a journey, then there's a holding space.
Right.
And I'm just
That's a good
wondering,
question. Yeah.
How that pans out for you as a teacher, as
Right.
the person in the centre responsible for their journey.
Right. That's a good question. Thank you for that. Because there is a risk in here, implicit. I have occasionally had a student coming with the topic that I thought was too close to their psychopathology, if you will. We're all neurotic. It's too close. And I've said, I really don't recommend you do that. You try something that's a little bit, where you have a little bit of distance from. So that's one answer. Another answer, out of experience, is that I have occasionally told my students, if you don't have a therapist, you really need one now, because I can't play that role for you as your research supervisor. And in fact, I'm not a clinician, so I can't do it anyway, actually. And it's probably just as well. I'm not a clinician. I don't try, because the process can get a little sticky sometimes emotionally. You can imagine. It's not. I've done that 2 or 3 times. You really need to either see a spiritual director if it's a spiritual issue, or a therapist if it's a more psychologically oriented issue. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So.
On that, I think we'll draw to a close, and I know that Ingrid wants to make a little announcement as well. I want to thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
And,
Thank you. You're welcome.
Actually, since Malcolm mentioned about how this came up, little synchronicity, and I'm just thinking that when you were saying about how you choose the topic that you find,
Mm-hmm.
I was feeling those synchronicities come in there as well. Sometimes the
Yeah.
message is coming to you. And
That's right.
the reason you're here today is because you emailed me.
That's
And
right.
it so happened, you said, "Could we
About
meet-"
something. Yeah. Right.
Something totally different. And you said, "Could we
Right.
meet up?" And I said, "Well, what's the date?" And I saw that the date you were going to be in this country coincided with our meeting, so that's how it came
Yeah.
to be.
Right. It was
So
quite.
let's give thanks for that. Because I didn't know it. I'm sure I know.
You're welcome. Pleasure.
Just to remind people that the talks tomorrow have changed, and the first one in the morning will be Fraser Watts, and not David Fontana, and David will be in the evening instead. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is very mundane, but important. If you've been coming for a long time, you'll know the system of the glasses in the evening when you have your drinks.
Oh,
So
no,
I've tried
I don't
all
know.
sorts of different things about this. Because what happens, everybody has a glass, then they put it down, and then they don't know where they put it, then they have another one, and then they're on to the glasses, and then something. So, once I've even stuck labels on, do you remember? So I've got another system today. So what I've done, taking infinite care, I've done hundreds of little labels, not with your names on, and pens. So what you should do is you take one of these, and then you can either write your name or do a little picture idiosyncratic to yourself or whatever, something you recognise. And then when you put your glass down, you can either put this under your glass or in your glass if it's empty. Make sure it's empty. So that's your way of keeping your glass. Now, for new people who've never been here before, I'll just tell you what happens. It's a bit different from other conferences. When we come out of here, we have this wine reception, which is just across there. Basically, that means we all stand around and drink wine and talk to each other. And then we go into dinner. And then after dinner, those who wish, there's no compunction to this, but most people do it, and you'd miss out if you didn't. We go into the lounge in there, and then see what happens. Now, it's completely spontaneous, even though some people I know have rehearsed all year for the spontaneity. But the kinds of things that may or may not happen, somebody may say a poem, and I know there are at least 2 guitars here, so someone may play, if the mood takes you. Nothing is planned, it's just what happens. Sometimes it develops into games. And the drinks are all free. I mean, you'll never find this anywhere else. You have free drinks all night. And I was thinking about this relaxing and playing. I thought, oh, how apt. Because that's exactly what we'll be doing, is relaxing and playing. So our intuition by tomorrow morning should be forever increased. So anyway, that's what happens. So for new people, don't be sort of phased if somebody suddenly stands up and sings or says a poem. You know, it's all in thing. Now, the other thing I have to tell you, if you're in Cober Hill, which is the main building over there, you may have been given one of these. If you haven't been given one of these, I'm going to tell you a number, and you must write this number down, because if you're locked out, you have to press this number into the door to get in. And I've been locked out in the past. I just wander about and hope somebody else who knows the number comes along. So it's C for Charlie. I've learned that. I've learned the police one.
Alpha Bravo Charlie.
Yeah, Delta.
Good.
Echo. Oh, anyway, we won't bother with that. But I can do it. C7462X. I'll repeat that. C7462X. And that should get you in. So now it's to the wine. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I've got quotes like Rosemarie.